Property prices predicted to boom by 30%. Now, this is really interesting because more data is starting to come out and more the change, I think, in the song that people have been singing about, oh, you'd never buy in Perth. Perth never makes money. It's a mine town. It's boom or bust. Sydney median house price to hit $2 million. Perth to hit $1 million by 2027. Now, that's from an Oxford Economics report, and I'm going to show you the table in the next slide. Perth propelled into property powerhouse. Oh, someone's a fan of alliteration. As WA's economic engine roars. Perth property boom shows no sign of slowing as experts predict thousands to join the $1 million property club. Again, lots of just the change in the rhetoric there, the change in the singing from the hymn book that we're seeing from the media is always interesting when you can catch it. Now, here's the actual table from Oxford Economics that I was able to dig up. So this is what they believe property prices are going to be in that middle column there, based on the $1 million mark by June 2027. So over the next 3 years. So let's just you can pause this and have a look in your own time. But the ones I want to point out is Sydney, they believe, is going to hit nearly $2 million, basically, 1.93 mil. Melbourne, 1.28, and Melbourne's on my radar for a couple years' time. I'm going to buy a few more investment properties probably in Brisbane and Perth for myself over the next couple years, but I'm just waiting to jump into Melbourne. I think Melbourne's going to be a really good runner in the next 3 to 5 years' time. It's going to go off. Brisbane, $1.21 million. Adelaide, almost $1 million. Perth overtaking that Adelaide position at $1.05 million. So quite interesting just to see what we think the market's going to do there. And I agree with Oxford Economics. Now, let's talk a bit more about migration. And I do talk about this quite a bit. I'm a very proud son of a migrant parent, and my parents are all migrants. And I think migration made our country great very long time ago. But now I think we're letting in a lot of people, and I don't know if we're going to be able to cope based on the numbers I'm about to go through with you now. Over 750,000 new people will have entered our country by the end of this financial year. The nation's population is forecast to grow by 7.4 million people by 2041, requiring an additional 2 million dwellings across our 4 major capital cities. And I've got the numbers I'll show you in a moment. Australia brought in a record 518,000 net overseas migrants last financial year. And in January this year, we welcomed over 55,000 migrants. That's more than double what we welcomed in January 2023. That's the highest January intake in Australian history. And you can see this chart shows Australian net overseas migration and just obviously how it took off after COVID and after we had vaccines. Recently, demographersID.com.au, so you can jump onto the website, estimated that Australia's population will increase by 9.2 million people by 2046. And the vast majority, 67% of that growth, will reside in 4 of our capital cities. And Adelaide is not one of them. It's Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth. Okay? And this is why when lots of people ask me about Adelaide, I say, well, it's usually not even on the radar for me because of the size of the economy. It just doesn't make as much sense as Perth. This chart shows projected population growth for all states and territories between 2022 and 2071. Now, I know that's a long time away. A lot of us are going to be very old people by then. But at the end of the day, it's just really interesting to see that projected population growth. And it is just right up in the air, isn't it? This is where the numbers really start to scare me. This chart shows dwelling approvals for monthly house versus unit approvals. So houses are in black, units are in orange. And you can see they are well below their 10-year decade averages, which is that dotted line you can see across the line there. During 2022-2023 financial year, Australia saw an increase of only 169,500 new dwellings. So this number fell significantly below what is required to house the record 626,000 growth of our population in Australia during that time. The current pace of construction is lagging by approximately 75,000 dwellings compared to the annual need of 240,000 new dwellings. And while approvals have trended a little higher through 2023, monthly approvals remain well below those previous decade averages, as you can see there. So my question is always, how the hell, excuse my language, is the Albanese government going to build 1.2 million new homes within 5 years of their time frame, which is what they promised? And the answer is they can't, okay? And this is not political. I don't care who's in office. It's just not something that anyone can promise. But it wins votes because there's a lot of people out there that are struggling and worried about housing affordability. But it's something they can't answer. Let's look at rental vacancy rates for those people that can't afford a house and must be renting. Capital city rental vacancy rates are 1%. And that's driving an increase in rents, which may attract more investors to the property market. And we have historically low vacancy rates and very rapidly rising rents. So we're seeing rental vacancies drop, now 66% below the 10-year average. So new dwelling approvals are trending lower. So the outlook for additional rental supply remains very poor. And I know I read something the other day where they said that the current amount of migration is outpacing construction of new dwellings 4-1. And that is a scary number. So anyone that's going, oh, the market's going to crash, market's going to crash, I can't see how. I can see how people can't afford it anymore in Australia, but then you've got people coming from other countries that think we're still very cheap. That's the big thing. If you are a country where you are importing people from all over the world in other countries, our country, when it comes to the property prices, look cheap. And if you don't agree with me, jump online and look at what the prices are in Hong Kong, Singapore, UK, Europe. Like, just go and look, check it out. So the Australian rental property vacancy rates for the cities across the nation, okay? This chart shows rental property vacancy rates in selected cities in Australia for February. And it shows here that Perth actually has the lowest vacancy rate. So even though the average is about 1%, Perth is at 0.4%, which also plays into some of the data that we're seeing for Perth as well. Now,